count first, and then we should think about what our opponent might play next. Look at their forcing moves, right? So I got a little bit ahead of myself. If we play a random move, look at these rooks screaming down the H-file. Rook in the corner, mate. So we're down a rook, mate in one is in the air. So we definitely feel an incredible sense of urgency. So where do we go from here? All the knight discoveries leading to nowhere. The other move that's really tempting here, I think, is queen to g4. That forces the king to e3. And where do we go from here? Well, we do have one other check here, which attacks the king and opens up the rook. And after the pawn captures our knight, notice we've opened up the fourth rank here. And notice the queen, pawn, and knight are all planning a family reunion there on d4. And the move knight d4, the new resource available, since the queen and the pawn guard d4, knight d4 is a really cool move. It's not forcing, but notice if white captures the knight, we have mate in one. Thanks to that newfound fourth rank discovery, the queen and the pawn harmonize to deliver mate here. So knight d4 is really cool. There's no way to safely capture the knight, and if white wastes a move like attacks our queen, notice the knight also is dreaming of knight f5, mate. The problem here, like I mentioned before, white is threatening mate in one. So here, as cool as knight d4 is, we don't have the time to flex. We don't have the time to enjoy the cool idea when we're getting mated in one move, right? So that's a problem. So going back, this is where we can get really lost. We look at, a number of knight moves. I didn't talk about other knight moves. You certainly could check those out as well. They don't really lead anywhere. And once the knight moves kind of hit a dead end after a dead end, we look at a move like queen g4, doesn't quite work out. Where do we go from there? Well, I think what makes this puzzle so hard to solve, unless you're just throwing paint on the canvas, we have to find a constructive way to hit a dead end and learn from that mistaken path. In other words, the first move in the puzzle solution is knight d4 check. And I think that's really hard to find without having already made the connection that queen g4 forces the king to e3. And the only follow-up check here that makes any sense is knight d5. It's incredibly forcing. After the pawn captures, we might notice, hey, we're so close to delivering a mate if not for that bishop there. But there's no obvious way to remove that guard. But by seeing the structure change, by opening up the fourth rank, and seeing we have 3 units harmonizing on d4, that's where we can sketch out a dream. Knight d4, nearly mate. If the opponent is kind enough to take our knight, then there is a mating pattern here. We're very close, but because knight d4 wasn't forcing, we lose the game in one move. So going back, what if we could mix the order up a little bit? How else could we try to make that work? By hitting brick wall after brick wall, dead end after dead end. Now we can kind of put these details together. What remains? Knight d4. Incredibly forcing because if the king moves aside, knight g4 is mate. So the only thing we have to calculate is the pawn capturing our knight. And here you have to be careful. If we have 2 moves in a row, we could take the pawn and deliver mate. But here again, mate in one is a problem. So we need to find something a little more forcing. But the key thing behind knight d4 is now we have built-in tension between the pawns. So we can take this pawn when it's favorable to do so. So here we can play queen to g4. We force the king to e3. And now if we attack the king, well, the king will happily collect the pawn and we don't have an obvious follow-up here. We don't want the king to escape. The king is kind of feeling pretty smothered here by its own units. And here we bring everything together. If I get the pawn to move here, then ed4 would be mate, like we sketched out before. And how do we do that? One forcing knight move, throwing in a nice queen check, then leads to another beautiful knight sacrifice. Knight d5, we see through the matrix here. The pawn is forced to capture our knight, and now we've opened up the fourth rank floodgates, and our pawn and queen work together beautifully to deliver mate.